Do you have the buy-in from your boards? Do you have the ability to get things done if we ask? And they went, absolutely. And that was a game changer. On day 3, we went, oh, this is just going to be amazing.
Hello, this is Matthew Grant, one of the partners at Insurtech London. In this week's episode, I'm talking to the 3 founders of Describe Data, Gerald, Vere, Michael Crawford and Mick Cooney, at the end of their session in the Lloyd's lab earlier this summer. Now, although based in Dublin, the team are regular visitors to London. We often see them at Insurtech London. Gerald is founder of Insurtech Ireland, which is part of the Jita group, of which Insurtech London is one of the leading companies. Now, it's really interesting to hear how the team have been testing out different propositions for insurers before landing on one specific area for where they were going to build their business. And this is in the space of D&O, directors and officers. Whilst during the Lloyd's lab, the team built out a tool to help underwriters assess the risk and manage the exposure to this $10 billion area of risk. Now, their experience in the Lloyd's lab was clearly a big success. Lots of engagement and support from Lloyd's and the underwriters. Describe Data was one of 10 companies to be selected from over 250 that applied for the second Lloyd's lab cohort. And they provide some great advice for companies starting out building technology solutions for insurers, whether through Lloyd's lab or indeed anywhere else. Here we are in the Lloyd's lab, sitting in a padded cell and all looking like remarkably casual for being in Lloyd's, and of course no sign of alcohol anywhere. Joined by Gerald, Vere, Michael Crawford and Mick Cooney, co-founders of Describe Data, who are just about to wrap up their cohort in the Lloyd's lab, I think working over the weekend to pull together their presentation for next week. So great, and you up on stage talking about cyber at Insurtech London earlier this year. Is that still what you're doing with Describe Data, or have you pivoted a bit since then?
The answer is a bit of both, and we basically built a risk engine to look kind of agnostically at various areas of risk. And the first thing we looked at was actually life and health information from the UK. We built a product for basically HR departments and quantified HR to help companies figure out how what their employees look like on a kind of an aggregate scale. We then applied that to terrorism and kidnap risk, which is what we applied to the first cohort of the Lloyd's lab with. And then one of the things we looked at, because we're all technologists, is cyber. And we looked at a few of the tools that are out there, and we talked to a few people, and we realized there was an opportunity to start looking into cyber and using the same approach that we had of looking at new data sources and using technology. And we did a lot of work on basically building a very unique cyber data set. And when we actually looked at the market, then we kind of done, after 3 or 4 months of looking at the market, we kind of realized there was an awful lot of stuff going on. People were flooding into that market, and it would be very, very difficult to actually make an impression in any kind of timescale. So we kind of reviewed and what we were doing and looking other areas. And one of the things we've looked at and what we've done for the second cohort of the Lloyd's lab, which we got into, is using the same techniques on directors and officers insurance. And that's a much more tractable problem in the timescale that we have in the lab, which is 10 weeks.
Interesting. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there doing D&O or directors and officers, but I'm not familiar of many companies doing that. So does it still feel like you've tapped into a market that's got a big potential?
Well, the market globally is about 10 billion in premium. 50% US, 50% rest of world. Within the London market and Lloyd's specifically, there are a lot of people underwriting D&O, and it's still quite a manual process. They use a lot of computers, obviously, to gather the information, but they collate the information manually. They build kind of like very simple reports. They look at financial information from companies, and then they use their gut feeling and basically their market knowledge to underwrite that. And what we've done is we've taken that process and we've basically automated as much as possible, but still leaving the underwriter in complete control. So what our idea is to give them a better understanding of the risk that they're facing, being able to project it a bit better, to be able to understand what emerging risks are coming down, and also to do something which is quite unique, which is look at their portfolios of risks and stress test them and understand how does a new risk affect my portfolio. So these tools are really, really kind of, they don't exist at the moment, and we've talked to the market over the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks by building a focus group. We've probably talked to maybe 30 directors and officers and underwriters, and most of the meetings we have are along the lines of, this is really interesting, we really need a tool like this.
Very interesting. So why do you think no one's tackled that successfully so far?
I think because it's a particularly difficult problem that looks like a particularly easy problem. For example, Mick, our CTO, went back to look at all of the ticker data for publicly traded companies in the US over the last 20 years. That sounds like a relatively easy data set to grab. It's actually not. It's very complex because companies merge, their symbols change, there's a lot of activity in that space. So that's an example of what seems to be a simple problem that isn't. So we were attracted to this because we're good at taking large unstructured data sets and distilling useful insights out of them. And to be frank, we were a little surprised that somebody wasn't doing this. It was only when we scratched the surface and saw why people weren't doing it that there were some pretty difficult problems to overcome. And we think we have.
And anything coming out at this stage where you're seeing themes that might not have been identified previously by underwriters, or are counterintuitive to what people might previously have thought?
We're still learning and we're still extracting the data. We have noticed that there seems to be, and we've yet to prove this, there seems to be a good correlation between corporate health and cyber health. So in the work that we did initially on cyber, it's interesting to align companies that are run well. In other words, they have no class action lawsuits or no corporate issues. And the implication is, of course, that if the companies run well, then it is also run well from a cyber perspective in terms of CISO and business continuity planning. So that was one thing that we've noticed that we're trying to pull a little bit more information out on.
Okay, and Michael, perhaps just in terms of the particular insurance class of D&O, it might be worthwhile just for anybody who's not familiar with that to say a couple of words about it. And then also interested just in terms of thematically how you're looking for the risk, the balance between looking at the corporate risk, but actually also the people themselves. How much is that influential in terms of assessing the risk?
Yeah, sure. I mean, directors and officers insurance is basically a class of business purchased usually by companies to indemnify the directors of a publicly quoted company, or sometimes privately quoted company, against a lawsuit that basically is filed against the company. Otherwise, the directors would have unlimited liability. And a lot of the time, say in the States, for instance, it's more or less a prerequisite because it's very hard to attract board talent if you're basically saying you come on board and work for me, and if the company gets sued, you're going to go bankrupt. So it's in place as a safety net for them, and it's actually quite a niche area of business. It's something that you probably wouldn't have heard of if you're outside the insurance world or the corporate insurance world, but it's actually quite a big business. Now, we found when talking to a lot of underwriters, which what we've done over the last week, when you talk to them, all of them say there's a couple of things strands to the D&O. It's like how well the company's run. Basically, whether it's if it's a large public company, there are certain things that will trigger a class action suit that you can't really do much about. Things like stock drops, which might be because they've done something in terms of the company's had some kind of failing. But there are also malicious cases that come out, and they all have to be defended. But fundamentally, what we hear from underwriters is that D&O is a people business. You're underwriting people. So understanding what those people's probity are, what connections they have, and what other work that they've done is a very important part of that business. And that's what we're starting to look into, the connections. Now, that information is kind of quite, it's relatively easily available. You can find out what other boards people are on and what other things they've had. So the question is, at the moment, that's a process of, it takes a long time for companies to extract that information. And what we're doing is building tools, very simply, that do the simple stuff well and very, very quickly.
And the sources of data for that, if you're looking at people, what kind of...
you've got all the... Basically, if you look at the Edgar database, particularly for the US, it's a massive kind of trove of data on company directors, and you can basically build network graphs of who's worked with who, and that sort of thing is very, very indicative. But there's a massive information in there. The problem is it's a very, very dense and huge data set. Even just trying to deal with it is relatively big data. So you're into engineering problems very, very quickly. And then on the other public side of the actual claims data, for security class action suits, that data is readily available. But Stanford have a large corpus of security class action suits, but it's effectively text data. It's basically court proceedings, etc., etc. And so that's a very, very useful resource. But again, it takes work to actually extract quantitative information out of it.
And then the brokers are obviously key in this, given that it's Lloyd's. Are you also, as part of the work you've been doing, engaging directly with brokers to get their input into this? Yeah,
we've talked to a lot of the primary insurers, and we've talked to a few brokers, and they have I mean, they're all interested in this because the D&O market is actually, it's hardening. The premium rates are going up, so people are actually interested in this. It's an area where people are starting to looking to basically come into. The brokers tend to be more kind of like looking at it on a one risk basis. They're interested in this risk that I'm placing now. What price can I get for it? And what we've done, because we've done some quite even relatively straightforward modelling, we can actually figure out what the underlying rate of what the underlying claim rate and the severity and frequency of a D&O claim is, and we can project forward, and we can basically give you more or less a kind of value bet on how much you're going to this is going to cost you if you take the premium. The brokers kind of look at it from a one risk point of view and whether they can get deal, but the insurers have they want to look at the one risk, but they also want to think, okay, what portfolio, what aggregations do I have? Where am I lacking? What do I want to write business? I've got a lot of business in one sector. Do I want to write it in another? And we can start looking at that quantitatively as well. And that kind of doesn't exist at the moment. That kind of non-geographic aggregation, it's probably it's probably bread and butter in things like hurricanes and storms, but not so much in things like D&O and casualty.
Got it. And then, so you're building the tool. How do you anticipate that the underwriters would actually get access to the analytics? Do you have to build a separate platform for that, or do you link it up through an API, or do you partner with somebody else?
Well, what we've done is we've built a prototype product, which is is the full stack effectively. It's got a front end on it, just because we know that the people who are going to use this tool are basically probably not the people who are going to buy the tool, because the IT department or the underwriting people are basically going to be buying it, but the actual users are kind of the people on the shop floor effectively. So we've more or less built the whole idea, the whole kind of stack of the product. But what we will want to do eventually is offer this as an API, and people can put it into their own systems. But we'll happily sell you a front end as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a really critical part for anybody building technology. There's the two things there. One is, my experience, a company doesn't need to have a front end that people can understand, visualize what's going on, but also recognizing that not everybody will necessarily want to use that front end. So you need to be able to create the flexibility to go straight to the data using the API. And at some point, maybe the front end just disappears. But it's very hard to sell something on the basis.
You can't. I mean, we work in a startup accelerator in Dublin, and it's co-sponsored by Google, and they come in once a month and do mentor meetings. And we've had some really interesting mentors from Google who basically have said, if your product takes more than half a day to train someone on, you're dead in the water. Solve the first 5 problems well. The very straight. These are their ideas of we do this for a living. These are the things that you have to hit. You have to build a front end. You can't sell an API.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the lab in Dublin, so that kind of brings us on to the Lloyd's lab. What's the sort of the primary reason for applying to the Lloyd's lab, and how's that worked out in practice?
The primary reason, as Michael said, that we applied to Cohort 1 as a very young startup was really to answer all the questions that the application process forces you to think about. So, what corporate structure would we think about, what products, how would we go to market, all that kind of information. So it was nice to know that we were all pretty much on the same page when those questions came through. We really didn't expect to do as well in Cohort 1 as we did. We almost got into Cohort 1 as a very young company, and we learned a lot from that process. So when the time came to apply to Cohort 2, about 6 months had passed, we could show some pretty decent progression in terms of the risk engine. Michael had already been on the stage for the pitch at Cohort 1, so he was quite familiar with the process. And I think it went really, really well. I mean, we got a lot of very positive feedback on the pitch for Cohort 2, and here we are.
And is there a fast track process if the companies that try for Cohort 1 or guess those that try for Cohort 2, the next time round they kind of get to the front of the queue, or does it just depend on the case?
I don't think so. I mean, I from what we've learned from the good people at Marks, the process is pretty linear and very well structured. So it starts with an open call. I think about 250 to 300 companies have applied typically for each of the 2 cohorts so far. The market itself, through a number of various connections, helps to distill that down to a long list of about 60. Of that list, about 20 make the short list and they're invited to pitch. And of the 20 that pitch, 10 are offered places. And in Cohort 2, there were 2 other companies that were already involved in Lloyd's who were also offered places. So there are 12 actually on Cohort 2. Great.
So it'd be interesting to hear how the actual experience on the ground works. So you turn up the first day, 4th floor, don't have to wear a tie, no jackets, and wear some jeans. So what happens over the period of time you're actually part of the lab?
We were very good about being suited and booted and even cufflinked, I think, on day one, because we were quite familiar with the Lloyd's process. The first week was incredible. It was full on. There was a lot of information. We had speakers in from the LMA, from Limos, from basically every different aspect of Lloyd's. We got to do the Lloyd's tour with the head waiter. Really bringing people up to speed with how Lloyd's works and what it is. The essence of it being a marketplace, and the history and the etiquette and so on. And then we really hit the ground running. We went straight into working and meeting our mentors, and trying to get as much out of the process as possible.
And back to your point, Michael, about engaging with the underwriters. So how does that process work? Because everyone's busy. Clearly, if it's to be valuable, you actually need to get some time in front of these people. Initially, you're probably not going to have anything much to offer them. How does that work, and how willing did you find people were to talk to you in this sort of fairly early stage?
Okay, I mean, when we signed up to the Lloyd's Lab, you sign up to a participation agreement as a company, and that basically says you can share your IP with Lloyd's, and Lloyd's can share data with you. Lloyd's also has a mentor agreement, which is also signed, where basically the mentors can come in, and they're basically handpicked from various companies. They select themselves to come in, and they have a very similar agreement, so they can share data with us, and they can talk very freely and frankly about what their problems are. So we signed this document, and we thought, this is great. This is how it works out. We walked in on day 2 to our first mentor meeting. There were 7 mentors from across the market, all marquee names. They shut the door, and literally they opened their kind of hearts to us, like, these are the problems that we have, and we want to give you data. And we kind of said to them, because we've been in a lot of these meetings, like, are you people, do you have the buy-in from your boards? Do you have the ability to get things done if we ask? And they went, absolutely. That was a game changer. On day 3, we went, oh, this is just going to be amazing. So then getting access to people was no problem. You say, I would like to come in and have a meeting with you. Can you put me through? And no problem, just bang, bang, bang. And that has been facilitated by Lloyd's and L Marks. They've been absolutely brilliant at that. So it is a very grown-up incubator. They don't really hold your hand, but you're basically given the tools and the access, and just told you, knock yourself out, kid.
And is that, do you think, been the experience of everybody else on the cohort, or is it because you've got a specific application that people really see there's value? A
combination of things. I think because we're not youngsters, we know the way this market works. We have a lot of connections anyway, and we just came in and knew that what we wanted to do was come in and basically make as many connections and get ourselves and our product in front of as many people as possible. So, and that's what we've done. We've just taken every meeting, to the extent that we've pushed off anything that wasn't core to the business. Such as we've had a lot of interest come from VCs and seed capital funds, and we've had to say to a lot of them, look, can you come talk to us in July? At the moment, we're basically, what we're doing now is we're making hay while the sun shines in Lloyd's.
And you're now at the point where presumably you're looking to get people to pay POC or some kind of consulting project. How is that looking in terms of getting some revenue coming in?
What we did was, when we kind of settled on D&O kind of week 1 or 2 of the lab, and we basically ran it by our mentors. And some of them write D&O, some of them don't, but they said they'd basically back us, and they'd come and give us help, and they'd introduce us to people. So we had a trade show halfway through this process, on week 5. And what we did is we actually built a prototype in 3 weeks of our product, a real live functioning product. And it looked very ropey because it was a prototype, and deliberately so, because you don't want to produce a finished product. We had a trade show. We had probably about 150 people come into the lab, and we got massive amounts of interest from that, and that drove an awful lot of conversations. From that, we actually went back to L Marks and Lloyd's and the LMA and said, we'd like to put a focus group together of D&O underwriters, and they basically opened the books to us and basically contacted maybe 10 or 15 companies, and most of them have come back, and we've had one-on-one meetings with them. We've then crowdsourced what they like and what they don't like about that, and then in the last 3 to 4 weeks, what we've written is that. And
any sort of early indications of what you can charge for it?
One of the things we came in here is actually what business model works as well. So we've asked people what business model, because people say, oh, let's charge per use, or charge for a license, or charge. And basically, we've actually asked those very explicit questions. If you were to buy this, how do you want to pay for it? So that's actually, almost what we try to do with this process in the Lloyd's Lab, is basically build a product, but also get product market fit and find a business model that works. So if we come out of this with a product and investor ready, then this is, that we've absolutely hit all our marks for what we wanted to get out of the Lloyd's Lab.
Yeah, and I guess the great advantage being here, you're either going to succeed well or not at all, because it's the nature of the way the business works here. You're probably going to see more than double-digit users of the product or none at all. It's unlikely you the business wouldn't survive anyway, but just the way the market works. So, well, congratulations on that. Sounds like a very sort of productive and effective use of time. So just switching back a little bit to Insurtech London, you've been fantastic supporters of ours. You've come across from Dublin, I think even especially sometimes, to come and see us. Just be interested to get your perspective on what you've made of that, and any sort of advice to anybody that hasn't yet been to our events, but what they can get out of them.
Well, we kind of started coming probably. I mean, I think I bumped into Robin at the kind of digital garage in 2015 or something like that. I think it was like Insurtech London had just started, and slowly but surely started coming over to London, because that's basically where all our business was at the time. We had a small consulting company doing kind of bespoke analytics work for insurance companies, and it was just, we knew nobody in London, and it was an incredible way to make a network very, very quickly. And coming from Ireland, it's a small country, networks are really powerful, and I think people underestimate the power of a network and contacts, and that's one of the reasons we come back. It's also we've met lots of people we know, we've made loads of friends, we've made loads of contacts through it. It's just been, I would highly recommend coming to Insurtech London. But just in general, in any business, go out and find who other companies that are doing something and go to those events. And this is where you get your next job from, or your business from.
Yeah, sorry. One thing I like to say about this, Matthew, is some people ask me, like, why should I go? And what I always say is because companies spend tens of thousands of pounds for market research, and you can just come to these events. And, well, I know for startups it's free, for other people there's a nominal fee, but you get fed as well. And, and sometimes there's free beer if you fancy it. So it's the kind of thing that marketing companies charge a lot for, and you just get it and you show up and you see a whole bunch of companies, or just see what the trends is going on.
Thanks, Mick. Yeah, and actually, if anybody wants to see the Describe Data team in action, you can look at the probably thousands of photographs now on the website, and literally see how effective they are at networking. Thanks very much for carving out some time. I know you've got a lot going on, but it's been a pleasure, and best of luck, and look forward to hearing how it all goes after you leave the lab.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Matthew. Much appreciated.
Gerald, Michael and Mick are now back in Dublin, but they are over in London regularly. Come along to our Insurtech London events if you want to meet them, or drop in and see them if you're in Dublin. Talking of events, we have an action-packed autumn season coming up now. Our next event will be on the 24th of September, where we'll be holding a reverse pitch for insurers and other large corporations to tell you what problems they are trying to solve. Come along, you may find your next client. Details of this event and all our other events, plus soon to be released the rest of the events for the remainder of the year, at www.insurtech.london.